Every choice we make echoes in eternity, leaving a trail of consequences that no one can outrun. Join us as we explore the haunting stories of the past and the lessons they leave behind. Hit that subscribe button now and let the journey begin.
Found the invoice on a Tuesday, not because I was snooping, not because some part of me finally decided to stop trusting him. I found it because our accountant, Barb, sent it to the shared drive by mistake. She meant to attach the Q3 vendor summary, and instead she uploaded a hotel folio from the Alderton, dated 3 weeks earlier. The night of my firm's 10-year anniversary gala. The night my husband told me he had to fly to Phoenix for a deposition. I remember sitting at my desk with my morning coffee still hot, clicking on the file thinking it was balance sheets. The room was the Hearthstone suite. 2 nights, champagne on arrival. The kind you have to request in advance. Rose petals, a couple's massage booked for Saturday morning. I sat with that for a long time. My name is not on that folio. His name is. And next to the checkout notes, in the section where hotels log special requests, anniversary package, per guest instructions. Our anniversary is in March. This was October. I have been an architect for 17 years. I started my firm Halcyon Studio when I was 29 with $60,000 I'd saved across 6 years of working for other people. A leased office the size of a large closet. And one client, a dentist in Evanston, who wanted his waiting room to feel less medical. I built that waiting room into a portfolio. Built that portfolio into a reputation. By the time I was 34, we had 12 employees and a project in 3 states. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that is what he is, legally, still, came into the picture in year 3. He was a litigation attorney. Smart, charming in the way men who argue for a living tend to be, controlled, deliberate, always aware of the room. We met at a fundraiser for a children's hospital. He bid on a dinner package at the silent auction and then found me standing near the open bar and said, "I just spent $400 for a meal I'm going to eat alone unless you help me." I thought it was funny. I thought he was funny. We were married 2 years later, small ceremony. My mother cried. His mother gave a toast that managed to mention his law school ranking twice. For the first few years, the arrangement made sense. He understood ambition. He didn't resent my hours. When I landed a project, the Whitmore Community Center, the Pellerin Hotel renovation, he would open a bottle of wine and actually listen while I explained why the load-bearing decisions mattered. That felt rare. I didn't take it for granted, but somewhere around year 5 of the marriage, year 8 of the firm, something shifted. It was slow enough that I kept explaining it away. He started referring to Halcyon as your little studio. Not to be cruel, I told myself. Just shorthand. Just the way some people diminish things they don't fully understand. When clients came to the house for dinner, he would speak over me about my own projects. Not aggressively, just consistently, naturally, like he'd forgotten I was the one who'd actually drafted the plans. I would let it pass because the dinner would go smoothly and I told myself it didn't matter who got credit at a dinner party. He started joining my meetings. That was the part I should have stopped earlier. He began coming to my office 1-2 afternoons a week, sitting in on client presentations just to observe. At first I thought he was being supportive. Then I noticed he was introducing himself as a strategic advisor to the firm. I had never given him that title. I had never asked him to advise anything, but he said it with such confidence that clients wrote it down. He reorganized my filing system once while I was at a site visit, told me it was more efficient. I spent 2 weeks not being able to find my own contracts. My senior associate, she's been with me since year 2, I'll call her my associate, pulled me aside about 8 months before the hotel folio. She said, "I don't know how to say this without overstepping." I told her to say it. She said, "He told the Brennan team that the revision to the east facade was his suggestion. It wasn't, it was mine. It had been in my notes since the initial site survey." I thanked her. I told her I would handle it. I went home and I said nothing, because by then, I had learned that bringing up these moments made me the problem. He would look at me with this particular expression, patient, slightly tired, and say something like, "I'm trying to help you, and this is how you respond." And I would feel the ground go soft under my feet, like I'd missed something obvious, like the issue was my perception and not his behavior. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one morning and find that your sense of yourself has been quietly relocated. It happens in small revisions over years until you are standing in your own firm and second-guessing whether the east facade idea was actually yours. I did not confront him the day I found the hotel folio. I closed the file. I finished my coffee. I went to my 11 o'clock meeting, which was a structural review for a residential project in Lincoln Park, and I sat at the head of the table, and I made 3 decisions that saved the client approximately $40,000 in foundation work. On the way back to my office, I called my college roommate. I'll call her my oldest friend, because she is. And I said, I need you to meet me for dinner. Tonight, don't ask questions yet. She met me at a Thai place near her apartment. I showed her the folio on my phone. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, How long have you known? I said, Since this morning. She said, No, how long have you known? I didn't answer that one right away. Here's what I knew, and had been folding away in the dark. There was a woman. She worked at his firm, not as an attorney, but in their marketing and business development department. I had met her at a firm holiday party 2 years earlier. She was younger than me by about 8 years. Confident the way women are when they know they're being watched by the right person, my husband had introduced her by saying, She's been incredible for our client pipeline. He used her first name. I'll call her his colleague, because that is how he described her. Always, firmly, whenever I raised any concern, she's a colleague. She's important to the team. You're reading into things that aren't there. There had been a weekend conference in September the year before, where he'd come home quieter than usual and gone straight to his office. There had been a dinner I'd seen on the credit card statement, 2 people, not a group, at a restaurant I'd always wanted to try and mentioned wanting to try, and he had never taken me. There had been the way he said her name on the phone sometimes, from the other room, not intimate exactly, but careful. The way you say the name of someone you are being careful about. I had taken all of these things and stacked them somewhere I wasn't looking. My oldest friend put her hand on mine and said, What do you want to do? I said, I want to be sure, and then I want to finish it properly. The thing about being an architect is that you understand systems. You understand that the visible structure, the walls, the facade, the beautiful lobby, is held up by things people never see. Foundations. Frames works. Load calculations done on paper months before anyone breaks ground. You cannot skip those steps. You cannot reverse engineer integrity. If you build on a weak foundation, everything that follows is compromised, no matter how beautiful it looks from the street. I had built my marriage on a foundation I had trusted someone else to maintain. That was my mistake. I would not make the same mistake. I would not make the same mistake about what came next. I called a divorce attorney, not one my husband knew, not anyone connected to his firm's network, a woman who came recommended by a colleague of mine in a different city. We met for coffee. I told her what I had. She told me what she needed. Over the next 6 weeks, I gathered everything quietly: financial disclosures, the firm's account records, documentation of his role at Halcyon. Specifically, the fact that he had no formal role, no partnership agreement, no equity stake, and no legal authority to represent the firm in any capacity. That last part mattered more than the affair, because while I was gathering the personal documentation, I discovered something else. He had been in communication with the developer, a contact he had made through one of my client dinners, a man who was building a mixed-use project on the north side, and he had represented himself in writing as a principal of Halcyon Studio. He had submitted a preliminary proposal. He had quoted fees. He had signed correspondence with my firm's name. He had done this without my knowledge, without my authorization, without any legal basis. The developer had responded. They had exchanged 8 emails over 3 months. The project was valued at $2.3 million. I printed every email. I sat with those printouts on my kitchen table on a Sunday morning. He was at the gym, or so he said. And I thought about the 17 years I'd spent building something from $60,000 and a closet-sized office and a dentist in Evanston who wanted his waiting room to feel less medical. I thought about my associate telling me he had taken credit for my work. I thought about the hotel folio, the champagne on arrival, the rose petals, the couple's massage. I thought about the expression he made when I raised concerns. Patient, slightly tired, I made a decision. The developer had reached out one more time, a week before I found the emails, asking for an update on the proposal timeline. The message was sitting unanswered in an account my husband had created using a variation of the firm's name. I composed a response. I identified myself as the actual principal and sole owner of Halcyon Studio. I explained that the individual who had been corresponding with him was not authorized to represent the firm in any capacity. I attached my articles of incorporation, my state registration, and a brief summary prepared by my attorney. I did not threaten. I did not explain more than was necessary. I closed by saying I would be in touch directly if I wished to pursue the project, and I signed it with my name and my title. His response came within 2 hours. He wanted to speak by phone. I declined and asked him to keep our correspondence to writing for documentation purposes. He was professional. He was also clearly alarmed. He said he had believed he was dealing with a legitimate principal. He said he wanted to make sure this was handled correctly. I appreciated that. I told him it would be. I forwarded the entire exchange to my attorney. She called me that afternoon and said, "This changes the scope of what we're doing." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you ready for that?" I said, "I've been ready. I just needed everything in writing." I did not tell my husband any of this. He came home from the gym that Sunday and made eggs and asked if I wanted to watch something that night. And I said, "Sure." And we sat on the couch and I watched him watch television. And I thought about how strange it is to know someone completely and not at all at the same time. We had been married for 9 years. I knew how he took his coffee. I knew the way he laughed when something genuinely surprised him. A little undone, not the polished laugh he used at work. I knew that he hated driving in the rain and that his father had never told him he was proud of him and that he kept that wound close and used it when he needed sympathy. I had loved him. That was the part I didn't let myself skip over, because I think it matters to be honest about it. I had loved him. And somewhere in the years of small corrections, of having my ideas returned to me slightly changed and attributed to him, of learning to second-guess my own perception, somewhere in all of that, the love had been replaced with something that looked like love from the outside but was mostly just habit and the fear of having been wrong about something so large. I wasn't afraid anymore. I watched the television and I let him refill my water glass when he went to the kitchen, and I said thank you, like a person who doesn't know anything. And I was very, very calm. The formal process began on a Wednesday. My attorney filed the necessary paperwork. She also drafted a cease and desist regarding the unauthorized use of Halcyon Studios' name and legal identity in business communications, which was served to my husband through his own firm, meaning his colleagues received it before he could explain it away. I was at a site visit when it happened. I got a text from my associate that just said, "He showed up." I told him you weren't here. I sent back a thumbs up and went back to reviewing the window installation. He called 4 times. I let it go to voicemail and listened to them later, in my car in the parking garage near the site. The first one was controlled. The second was less controlled. The third was an attempt at rationalization. He had been trying to help the firm. He had been making connections I didn't have time to pursue. He had been acting in our shared interest. The fourth was quiet and he said, "I think we need to talk about what you want here." I texted back, "My attorney will be in touch about scheduling." There is a moment in every structural assessment when you locate the thing that has been holding up the problem. Not the visible damage, the crack in the wall, the warped floor, but the underlying failure. The thing that, once corrected, means everything else can be rebuilt properly. The unauthorized business correspondence was the structural failure. The affair was the crack in the wall. His attorney reached out within 48 hours. They wanted to discuss settlement. My attorney told me we had significant leverage. The misrepresentation to the developer alone created real liability, and we had 8 months of documentation showing a pattern of him inserting himself into the firm's operations without authorization. We negotiated over 6 weeks. He did not get any claim to the firm. There was no legal basis for one, and he knew it. He agreed to a full accounting of any business contacts he had made using Halcyon's name, and to written acknowledgement that he had misrepresented his authority. The divorce settlement was clean. I kept the firm. I kept the Lincoln Park project. I kept the apartment, which I had purchased before we married and titled in my name. He moved out on a Saturday in February. My associate and 2 of my junior staff helped me repaint the home office that afternoon. Not because it needed it, but because I wanted the room to smell different. The developer on the North Side project, the $2.3 million mixed-use building, called me 2 months later. He said he'd done his research. He said he liked our portfolio. He said the project had been delayed, but was back on track, and he wanted to know if Halcyon was still interested. I said yes. We broke ground in the fall. My associate asked me once, toward the end of everything, whether I was angry. She said it gently, the way she says most things. She's one of those people who understands that some questions need to be asked quietly. I thought about it honestly. I said, yes, not the hot immediate kind of anger that had passed somewhere around week 3 of the negotiations, when I realized I was spending energy on feeling things about him instead of building what came next. The anger that stayed was the quieter kind, the kind that comes from knowing you spent years adjusting your own perception to accommodate someone else's version of reality. The kind that makes you careful, going forward, in ways you weren't before. I don't think that kind of anger is a bad thing to carry. I think it can be structural, if you let it, something load-bearing. Something that holds the new construction up. Halcyon's studio is 15 people now. We have projects in 4 states. Last spring, we were shortlisted for a regional design award, the kind I used to tell my husband about over dinner, explaining why the load-bearing decisions mattered, back when I believed he was listening. I still explain the load-bearing decisions. I have an entire team who listens. The waiting room for the dentist in Evanston is still there. I drove past it once, a few years ago. It was before everything, or maybe during, I can't remember exactly. The design holds. You can tell when something was built right, even 20 years later. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the ending with him, not the settlement, not the moment I press send on that email to the developer. I keep coming back to the foundation, the $60,000. The closet office. The decision, made alone, that this was worth building. I built it right. He was never the reason it stood, he just took a long time to prove it. I've been asked more than once what the turning point was. People want a single moment, the file that opened wrong, the folio with the champagne order and the rose petals in the anniversary package that wasn't ours. And yes, that was the moment I stopped pretending I didn't know, but it wasn't the turning point. The turning point was quieter than that, and it happened much earlier, in an ordinary conference room, when I sat at the head of my own table and realized I was waiting for permission from someone who had no authority to give it. That's the thing about what happened to me that I think people miss when they hear cheating husband and assume they understand the story. The affair was painful, but the affair was almost secondary to the other thing. The slow, patient way he had moved into the architecture of my professional life and rearranged it to center himself. A title he gave himself. Credit he absolved without asking. 8 emails to a developer worth $2.3 million, signed with the name of something I'd built with my own hands before he was ever in the picture. Actions accumulate. That's not a religious idea, it's just physics, and it's just math. Every choice a person makes is also a decision about who they are becoming. He made 100 small choices to take what wasn't his, and those choices compounded until there was no version of the story where he walked away whole. Not because I was punishing him, because the math doesn't lie. You cannot build something on a foundation of someone else's work and expect it to stand when they stop holding it up. I think about my associate, who came to me 8 months before everything and said she didn't know how to say it without overstepping. She said it anyway. That took integrity, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself. She didn't have anything to gain from telling me. She told me because it was true and because she thought I deserved to know. I have tried to deserve that kind of loyalty ever since. And I think about what it cost me to say nothing for so long, not out of weakness. I want to be clear about that. But out of a misplaced belief that managing his ego was a form of kindness. It wasn't. It was a form of avoidance. Every time I let a small wrong pass unremarked, I was training both of us to believe it was acceptable. I was borrowing peace at the cost of truth, and eventually the debt came due. That's not punishment from the universe. That's just what happens when you defer the honest conversation long enough. What I kept in the end wasn't the settlement or the apartment or the North Side project, though I kept all of those things. What I kept was the firm I had built correctly. $60,000. A closet office. A dentist who wanted his waiting room to feel less clinical. That foundation never moved, no matter how much weight was added on top of it, no matter how many times someone tried to convince me I hadn't built it alone. Intelligence isn't just knowing things, It's knowing which things matter and refusing to let anyone reclassify them when it's convenient for them. I knew what I had built. I let myself be talked out of that knowing for too long. Getting it back, not the credit but the certainty, was worth everything the process cost. The waiting room in Evanston is still standing. So is Halcyon. So am I.